Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Voices of the Soul. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into something pretty heavy.
Yeah.
We are going to be unpacking a Reddit post from the Relationship Advice subreddit that's really sparked a lot of conversation,
This post is really interesting because it highlights a lot of the challenges that couples face,
right?
especially after having kids.
Yeah,
It's a good reminder that relationships are constantly evolving and that communication is key at every stage.
exactly. So to kind of set the scene here, the original poster, who goes by the username OpenEducation4370, is a 33-year-old woman, and she's been married for 8 years.
Okay.
They have two young children, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Wow, so busy.
Yeah, and she's the primary breadwinner
Okay.
and handles most of the childcare.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so she's feeling incredibly overwhelmed
Yeah, I can imagine.
by her husband's constant pressure for sex.
It's important to note that this pressure isn't just about frequency.
Right.
It's the way he approaches intimacy that starts to get concerning.
Yes, and this is where it gets really interesting, to say the least. The husband seems to view affection as a transaction.
Oh, wow.
He will make comments like, "Does this loosen up your mouth for later?" when he brings her coffee or a snack. It's like he's trying to barter for intimacy,
Yeah.
which honestly is pretty cringeworthy.
That transactional approach to intimacy is definitely a red flag.
Yeah.
It suggests a lack of respect for her autonomy and a focus on his needs over hers.
Right.
And it raises questions about the power dynamic within their relationship.
Exactly. And it's not just the comments.
Okay.
He also blames her for his mood swings, which are starting to affect their 4-year-old daughter.
Oh, no.
Yeah, she's actually asking her mom why daddy is mad at her.
That's really concerning.
Yeah.
Because it shows how this conflict is impacting their children.
For sure.
Kids are incredibly perceptive, and they pick up on these things even if we think they don't.
Right, absolutely. And to make matters worse, he refuses to go to therapy. He
What?
claims that therapy is biased against men,
Oh, wow.
which is, unfortunately a pretty common excuse.
Yeah, that resistance to therapy is another red flag.
Uh-huh.
It suggests a lack of willingness to take responsibility for his actions and work towards a solution.
Exactly. So we have this incredibly tense situation.
Yeah.
And then the post hits Reddit,
Oh, boy.
and let me tell you, the responses are intense.
I bet.
People are understandably disgusted by the husband's behavior.
Yeah.
They're calling him out for being manipulative and potentially abusive.
Wow.
Many are urging her to leave the relationship for her own well-being and that of her children.
The Reddit reactions are fascinating. It's a glimpse into society perceptions of healthy relationships.
Right?
The fact that so many people are outraged by his behavior speaks volumes about the importance of respect, consent, and emotional intelligence in a partnership.
It's like a collective wake-up call.
Yeah.
Like everyone's saying, girl, you deserve so much better than this.
For sure.
But even amidst all the calls to leave,
Okay.
there are a few comments suggesting she try finding a male therapist,
Really?
one where her husband might be more open to listening to.
That suggestion highlights a common misconception that therapy needs to validate your existing beliefs to be effective.
Right.
But effective therapy actually challenges those beliefs, encouraging introspection and growth.
Right.
It's about developing healthier patterns of behavior regardless of the therapist's gender.
And honestly, at this point, I'm not sure any therapist, male or female, could fix this without the husband first acknowledging that his behavior is a problem.
Yeah.
He seems to think he's entitled to sex, and that his wife's body is there to satisfy his needs regardless of her own feelings or the impact on their children.
That entitlement mentality is definitely a major red flag.
Yes.
It points to a lack of empathy, a disregard for her boundaries, and a fundamentally skewed understanding of what constitutes a healthy, intimate relationship.
So we have this Reddit post that sparked a huge debate.
Yeah.
But before we get further into the responses and expert analysis,
Okay.
let's pause here for a moment and ask ourselves, is any of this normal?
Yeah.
Is it typical for women to experience a lower sex drive after having children? What do you think?
It's incredibly common for women's bodies and desires to shift after childbirth.
Okay.
There are hormonal changes, sleep deprivation, and the sheer exhaustion of caring for young children.
Right.
It's completely normal and understandable.
And yet there's still this societal pressure on women to maintain a certain level of sexual availability no matter what's going on in their lives.
It's true.
It's like we're expected to be superwomen handling a career motherhood and a fulfilling sex life all at once.
Right.
It's just not realistic for many women.
And this expectation often leads to feelings of guilt, inadequacy, and resentment,
Right.
which further erode the foundation of a relationship.
So how do we reconcile these differing needs in a relationship?
Yeah.
Because mismatched libidos are pretty common,
Yeah.
especially once kids enter the picture and life gets chaotic.
Open and honest communication is essential.
Okay.
Both partners need to feel safe expressing their desires, fears, and concerns without judgment.
Okay?
This creates a space for understanding compromise and the exploration of different ways to connect intimately beyond just intercourse.
That sounds great in theory,
Yeah,
but it seems incredibly difficult to achieve when you're dealing with someone like this husband who's weaponizing his moods and impacting their children.
right.
It creates a toxic atmosphere where it feels almost impossible to have a healthy conversation about anything,
Yeah.
let alone something as sensitive as sex.
You've hit on a crucial point here. This situation is about more than just a mismatch in desire.
Okay?
The husband's behavior, especially its impact on their children, raises serious concerns about potential emotional abuse and coercion.
This has been a lot to take in so far. We've covered a lot of ground, but it feels like there's still so much to unpack.
Absolutely, and we'll dive deeper in the next part of this deep dive.
Yes.
We'll analyze the Reddit reactions, explore potential underlying issues, and discuss possible solutions for Open Education 4370.
Right. We'll be back with more insights and expert analysis in just a moment, so stay tuned.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were discussing how the husband's behavior in this Reddit post goes beyond a simple mismatch in desire.
Yeah, it's like there's this underlying power imbalance that makes the whole situation feel really unhealthy.
Exactly, and that's something that comes up a lot in the Reddit comments. People are pointing out specific red flags that suggest a pattern of control and manipulation.
So let's dive into some of those red flags. What are people noticing?
Well, first and foremost, there's that transactional approach to affection that we discussed earlier. The fact that he uses gifts as leverage for sex is a huge problem.
Yeah, it just feels so demeaning. Like he's reducing their relationship to a series of transactions. Where's the genuine affection?
It's missing, and that's what's so concerning. And then you have the impact his behavior is having on their daughter. The fact that a 4-year-old is noticing and verbalizing his mood swings is a big red flag.
It's heartbreaking to think about that little girl feeling the tension and wondering why her dad is angry. That kind of environment can be so damaging for a child's emotional development.
Absolutely. And then there's his refusal to go to therapy. That's a sign that he's not willing to look inward and take responsibility for his actions. He'd rather blame external factors than acknowledge his own role in the conflict.
And let's not forget those crass comments he makes, like, does this loosen up your mouth for later? Who says that to their wife? It's just so objectifying and disrespectful.
Those comments are not just isolated incidents. They're part of a larger pattern of disregard for her feelings and boundaries. It's verbal abuse, plain and simple.
So what can someone do if they're in a similar situation? What are the first steps towards addressing this kind of behavior?
The first step is recognizing that there's a problem. It's easy to make excuses or minimize the behavior, but it's crucial to call it out for what it is: unhealthy, disrespectful, and potentially abusive.
And what if the other person denies it or refuses to change? What then?
That's where seeking outside support becomes essential. Talking to a trusted friend, family member, or therapist can provide validation, guidance, and a safe space to process what's happening.
That makes sense. What about couples therapy? Is there any point in trying that if one person is resistant?
Couples therapy can be incredibly beneficial, but it requires both partners to be willing to participate and work towards positive change. If one person is digging in their heels and refusing to acknowledge their own role in the conflict, it's unlikely to be successful.
So what are we really seeing here? What's at the core of this situation?
At its core, this is a situation where one partner's needs and desires are consistently prioritized over the others. It's about control manipulation and a lack of respect for the other person's autonomy. And unfortunately, that's a dynamic we see far too often in relationships.
It's so disheartening, but I think it's important to talk about it.
Absolutely. By shining a light on these issues, we can help people recognize the red flags and empower them to seek help or make changes before it's too late.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about potential solutions. Let's say you're listening to this and you see yourself in Open Education 4370's story. What advice would you give?
The first and most important piece of advice is to prioritize your own safety and well-being as well as that of your children. If there is any sense of physical or emotional threat, reaching out to a domestic violence hotline or seeking legal counsel is absolutely essential.
Right. Sometimes removing yourself from a dangerous situation is the most important step. But let's say you don't feel physically threatened, but you are emotionally drained and desperate for change. What then?
Then I would strongly recommend seeking individual therapy. A therapist can provide a safe and supportive space to process your emotions, explore your options, and develop strategies for communicating your needs and setting boundaries.
Because from what we've seen in the Reddit post, it sounds like Open Education 4370 has been trying to communicate her needs, but her husband just isn't listening. He's so focused on his own desires that he's completely disregarding her feelings.
That's a common pattern in relationships where there's an imbalance of power. Individual therapy can help her develop the assertiveness skills and self-confidence to advocate for herself more effectively.
That makes a lot of sense. And what about the husband? Is there any hope for him to change?
Change is always possible, but it requires self-awareness, a willingness to take responsibility for one's actions, and a genuine commitment to doing the work. In his case, that would likely involve addressing his entitlement mentality, learning how to manage his emotions in a healthy way, and developing empathy for his wife and children.
So therapy, both individually and potentially as a couple, seems to be a recurring theme here. But what if he refuses? What other options are there?
There are resources available for partners of people who struggle with compulsive sexual behavior, like Es-Anon, which offers support groups and educational materials. These groups can help someone understand the nature of these behaviors and develop coping mechanisms.
This has been a lot to process. We've talked about red flags, the impact on children, and the importance of seeking support. It's heavy stuff, but I think it's vital to have these conversations.
I agree. By bringing these issues out into the open, we can help people feel less alone and empower them to make positive changes in their own lives.
And before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some more potential solutions and strategies for navigating these challenging relationship dynamics, I want to remind everyone that you're listening to Voices of the Soul. If you're finding this exploration of human connection insightful, hit that subscribe button and leave a review. It really does help us continue to bring you these deep dives into the complexities of life and relationships. Welcome back to Voices of the Soul. We've been talking about some really heavy stuff today, like how to recognize red flags in a relationship and the importance of seeking support when things get tough.
Yeah, we've seen how mismatched libidos combined with unhealthy behaviors can create a toxic environment, especially when there's a lack of respect and communication.
Before the break, we started talking about potential solutions for Open Education 4370, the woman who shared her story on Reddit. We talked about the importance of prioritizing safety-seeking therapy and understanding the dynamics of power and control in relationships.
And one of the things that really stood out to me in her post was the sense of loneliness and isolation she was feeling.
It makes sense, right? When you're constantly being pressured and your needs are being ignored, it can be incredibly isolating, even if you're in a relationship.
Absolutely. That's why finding support is so crucial, whether it's through therapy support groups or trusted friends and family. Having a network of people who understand and validate your experiences can make all the difference.
And I think that's something we often forget. We get so caught up in the idea of romantic love being the answer to everything that we forget the importance of having other supportive relationships in our lives.
Right, we're social creatures and we need connection and belonging. And sometimes that means looking beyond our romantic partners for support and validation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the most important message you want listeners to take away?
I think the key takeaway is this. You deserve to be in a relationship where your needs are respected, your voice is heard, and your well-being is a priority. If you're not experiencing that, it's okay to seek help, set boundaries, and even walk away if necessary.
That's such a powerful message. And it's a reminder that we always have choices. We don't have to stay in situations that are hurting us.
Exactly. Sometimes the most loving act we can do for ourselves is to walk away from something that's no longer serving us. It's not always easy, but it can be incredibly liberating.
This has been such an insightful and thought-provoking conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complexities of relationships. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more insightful conversations, be sure to subscribe to Voices of the Soul on your favorite podcast app. And for even more thought-provoking content, check out the Shauna Pollage YouTube channel, where we explore a wide range of topics related to personal growth, spirituality, and human connection. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the mysteries of the soul.